All right, well, here it is, following day, July 17th. It just ended the video with being on that river farm, and Joey just called me. I'm on the phone with Ryan Ludwig, actually. We're going over a main show. And we have secured another piece that we were very excited about when going to ask for permission. It's a 75-acre parcel, and landowner gave us bow hunting rights. Sounds like he's an early muzzleloader hunter, but I'm very much looking forward to building that relationship with Joy. Hopefully we can help him. Maybe we can even film one of his hunts if he'd let us. But allegedly, there's a freakishly huge deer out there, according to him. Very, very wide frame deer. And either way, we got another piece of ground to hunt, which means we got some more cameras to put out, and we will see what that piece holds. But first look, like it a lot. So it's a really good neighborhood. There's pieces around it you'd rather be on from an access standpoint. We can only come from the west, but hey, we'll take what we can get, and that's an exciting thing.
Well, if you guys have been paying attention to social media and what's going on here in Iowa recently, you guys probably seen the verbiage where it sounds like public trail cameras are not going to be allowed anymore. It's pretty crazy, you know. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been running non-cells or cell cameras on public ground, but I got to take them down. But I am at one of my favorite spots I've ever found. Ever since I was a kid, this spot has been a banger. But Shay and I came out here and we put a trax camera over this fence gap. This is public ground. Look at this vine scrape, you guys. That is right next to me, right here. Still getting hit, still worked. Mega trails through here. There's rubs all over. I mean, if I was scouting right now, this time of year, now that I can't use trail cameras on public, you can go scouting around this time of year and find great sign and find great stand locations. I guess no camera locations on public anymore, but we had several really good bucks here, and this is public as public gets. It's just very, very tough to access this point. But you know, this week we're still talking about our plan of approach going into the fall. Josh is gonna give us his spin on what he's doing for this Droptine deer. Really excited to see how it turns out. He had some cool encounters last year, a lot of history now that he's got 2 or 3 years of sheds. I can't even keep count. That shed hunting was nuts. But we're gonna jump over to him. I hope you guys enjoy it, and as always, thanks for watching this week, guys.
Well, what's up, guys? It is June 10th and it's Monday, so we are actually filming this right now, the same day that you're going to be watching it. Going back a little bit, you know, in the beginning of the episode, it's pretty obvious what we're talking about today. We're back on the Droptine farm. It's a place I call the Big Bird Farm. We're talking about this deer, Droptine 10. Last week's show, you know, Kaleb talked about permission farms, gave a lot of great tips on how to acquire them and a process that works really well for him. So if you haven't checked that out, please go do so. There's a lot of good information that I think is applicable no matter what state you're in. You know, one thing I'll say about Kaleb is he is relentless in his efforts, and more importantly, he's relentless in his effort to maintain relationships once he establishes them. So the place that I'm on today, it is a permission farm as well. Ryan and I actually came out here a few days ago, redeployed the Cuddy Link system, and the reason why I did that more than anything was that I'm gonna get the landowner on the cellular service just so he can check out the photos. You know, it's one thing that he finds a lot of enjoyment in, and it's just a little, you know, opportunity to continue to build the friendship, text back and forth in a time of year that's not hunting season. And though I don't have a ton of things to offer this gentleman, that is one of them. So we were gonna film this segment that day, but it was super windy, didn't wanna blow out your guys' ears. And then following that, We actually had our summer meeting this weekend. Ton of team members from across the regional staffs were able to make it. Mike ended up grilling a pig in his Louisiana Cajun box, which is really, really awesome. And it was just a weekend of, you know, hanging out with friends. A lot of our partners were able to make it, talk about some of the upcoming products and just strategies this year. And, you know, it was a great time. So that's why we're here today. Again, Monday, June 10th, we're getting to that time of the year where people are starting to get excited, think about deer. Gavin's in the middle of chasing November. And like I said, cameras are out. And what we're gonna talk about today, as Kaleb teased, is just, I have a plan that I think could work for the Droptine for 2024. However, you know, we thought, why not talk through all the clues that this buck left us, how we got there. You know, we didn't just wake up and go, I think that this is a good opportunity, let's just do it and go from there. But it's nothing new information-wise. You know, you can watch a lot of great shows out there, and there's a lot of people that are very, very smart with experience and, you know, working backwards to try and figure these deer out. And so that's what I'm gonna talk about today, is what is our plan, and then ultimately, how did we get there? So to get to what the plan is for 2024, I felt like the first step is, let's go all the way back to the summer of 2023, right after the, you know, interview that I did there in my office talking to Rye. You know, we acquired permission on this property. You know, where I started as far as trying to find a new spot to hunt for 2023, you know, full transparency, I wanted to find places that were closer to where my girlfriend lived, just to make things a little bit easier on us in the fall. I'm gone a lot, but hunting closer to her allowed for us to spend more time together. Plus, she's starting to get into bow hunting a little bit more. And when we figured out that we were gonna be able to hunt this piece, my first step on a new property is always looking at onX. You know, I look at it and I think, what's good about it? And more importantly for me, it might seem a little bit negative, is what are going to be the challenges of it? Permission farms, you know, you really, like Kaleb talked about last week, you're limited on the variables that you can control. And on this piece of property in particular, you know, looking at a map right away, you can tell it's a lot of grass, not a lot of quote unquote traditional cover when it comes to what you can hunt. And most importantly, what I looked at was a problem was our access. We can't come from the south, can't come from the east, and we really can't come from the north. Westerly access is gonna be our best bet. And when am I gonna be probably trying to key in on hunting these farms? Great weather, northerly cold fronts, and you know, with that, we're kind of limited into how we can get into these spots. And so that was, looking at a map, one of the most important things that I felt like we were gonna have to navigate. Now, luckily, once I got out here, I realized there was a ton of maintained trails from the property owner. You know, the property owner spends a lot of time out here in the first place, you know, so there's a lot of human activity throughout the entire season. He has honeybees that he takes care of. He's got a lot of trees, you know, that he is maintaining. And ultimately, you know, he's a person that spends a lot of time on his property because he's worked very hard over the years to acquire it. So that was something right away that, you know, maybe as a deer hunter, you're not super excited about human activity constantly. How is that going to affect the bucks? But at the end of the day, being on a permission farm, right away, it just threw it out of the, you know, opportunities to get frustrated, because this gentleman's letting me hunt. So no matter what the situations are, the variables, we're gonna work around them. But with that human activity and with those mode trails, it really gave us a lot more opportunity as far as access than I realized. You know, once we got out here, sure, we're not gonna ever have that perfect wind in your face scenario, but we were able to, with low scent impact, walk anywhere, get anywhere that we needed to. And that, you know, as time progressed in the hunting season, ended up being very fruitful. So that was step one. Step two, following all the mapping, was to get actually out here on the property. And I remember that first day very distinctly. You know, it was one of the first times I got to meet the property owner. He took us around, showed us some of the highlights. And right away, you know, I felt like, oh my gosh, this place is really beautiful, but, you know, not necessarily sure what kind of deer were on it. At that point, I remember the landowner talking about this really big, wide deer that he had been seeing. And so we wanted to get a camera out that day, Joy and Gavin with me. And there's obviously a lot of different places that I could put a camera, but I was trying to find a spot that I felt like would be a pinch, you know, a spot that is going to force any deer that's in the general vicinity to bottleneck down. And it's actually right behind Ride, down in this little crossing. You know, I remember when we walked down in there, there was obviously your natural trail you could see. There's a bean field on the east side and some really good cover on the ridge right there. And when you know it, fast forward a few weeks later, Alex Raymond and I, the intern in 2023, get a picture of this guy walking right through the creek bottom right there. Droptine to, you know, just salivate about. Big deer, target located. I will kill that thing all day. This isn't my computer, so I can't log into my camp account. That gets a guy excited. We're gonna go to the farm tomorrow. We're going to this piece tomorrow anyway. And I've literally only got the home camera on it, so got 7 more cameras to put out there and a target acquired. You know, excitement from there just skyrocketed. You know, here we are, brand new property, have a target, quote unquote, to chase. And at that point, what do? Well, you want more information. And so we finally made the time, come out here, deploy a full cutting link system, just picked as many spots that I felt like were gonna give me information, not only in the summer time frame, but also as we got into the fall, you know, leading into early October. And, you know, we were expecting to get some photos of this guy, but the excitement just continued to pick up from there. I remember we got photos of him. So on that crossing, I went through and weed-eated a path down there just so that it was a little bit easier. And anytime I wanted to go in there, there wouldn't be as much of a scent profile. And within, you know, the same day, deer were back on that camera. And then a few days later, he was back on there. So we knew he was in the area. You know, being a first-year farm, you're not really sure what goes from there, right? It's summer, you've never hunted it in the fall. And then when you know it, a few days later, we had this big deer called the 6x5 show up. And that's the deer I think that the landowner was seeing. So here we are, 2 targets. And fast forward, you know, we're starting to realize we got some really good deer on here, a lot of bucks and not so many does. You know, I'd say generally speaking for Iowa, a lower deer population. And, you know, just really, really exciting heading into those first few weeks of October. So step number 3 following all the camera deployment is, okay, we're starting to get some information rolling in, you know, as far as how deer are moving through, what hot spots are sticking out. And one thing right away that I remember distinctly doing was where we first got Droptine, I was super excited about it as a spot to hunt, but then over time I realized it's really not an opportunity for us. It's a good spot where deer go, but all the wind does is swirl right here. There's one good tree, and even if we got into that tree, I don't think we'd ever be able to enter and exit. So that's one thing with this property is, you know, the south side became kind of a hot spot for me. You know, that's where the bucks were. It made sense. The agriculture was on the east and the south and to the west. There's 2 big ponds on the south side here. And there was one camera that really started to stick out to me. It's one that I talked about last year called the apple tree. And why did it stick out? Well, that's where a lot of the bucks were coming out in daylight. And, you know, I wasn't entirely sure where they were coming from, but, you know, what they're doing in September, I didn't expect it to change that much come October as long as the ag stayed the same. And moving forward, here we go, late September, there's a storm front that rolls through, Droptine daylights, and I want to say it was like 6:30. Very, very early. And so that told me that wherever he was bedding that particular night, he was close. You know, fast forward a week or so later, right before opening day, Alex and I put together a redneck hay bale blind, set it up right by that apple tree, and October 1st, boom, we see Droptine. Now, something in full transparency is we probably should have killed him that night had I not been hard-headed. You know, I felt like watching that MRI, here we are, he's coming by this apple tree in daylight, talking to the landowner the same day that we were assembling that blind. He gave me a little bit of a tidbit of, no, he walked the pond dam before he got up to your camera. And I looked at Alex, I was like, should we put it over there? And that maybe, you know, well, we should have, because October 1st, where'd he walk out? Same exact spot. And, you know, following that, again, we're getting all this information. You know, we've got daylight activity on him in late September. We got daylight on October 1st. And the October 1st day was horrible conditions. I mean, it was super, super hot. However, it was a south wind that the north wind switch was occurring. And, you know, at the time, we really hadn't put together this pattern, but that becomes very, very important as this story goes. So fast forward for 2023 to wrap things up. You know, we've got cameras and locations that we feel like are giving us great data. This deer is still there. We moved that hay bale blind over to the little island by where the deer would come in and drink. and we never saw him again. You know, the short version is he daylighted a few more times right on the cusp of shooting light on that same exact location. And then the days that we were hunting him on the cold fronts, he was nowhere to be seen. I mean, if you look back, I remember in early October, there was cold front after cold front after cold front. And everybody on the team was having great hunts on those nights except me. You know, I was seeing a doe and a fawn basically every time. And when I say that it was except me not having a good hunt, you know, you would expect that if Droptine would daylight on the bad days, well, then you would expect that he would do it on the good days, right? So at that time, we really weren't putting together the pieces, and, you know, sitting where we are today, that ends up playing a pretty big role in looking back at the information that was given to us and coming up with a plan. But moving forward, the rest of the fall, you know, the deer ended up leaving, I would say. I feel pretty comfortable to say his fall range was not here. We were on the fringe of it, and I would say we were on the very, very southern edge of it. Once that agriculture around us was harvested, he kind of just vanished. And, you know, that makes sense. I mean, this is a pretty active, you know, farm as far as human intrusion goes. I think I've got a pretty good idea of where he ended up going based on some information that I was able to acquire. Late November, he came back for the does, and we had a window to get after him, but we just unfortunately were not able to make it happen. And although that was kind of disappointing, because frankly, you know, when you have a deer of that caliber, you got to take advantage of your opportunities. We did not, and the only positive of that is moving into 2024, the story continues. So rolling into that late season time frame, you know, one thing I would like to highlight is that this buck did move back in, and I would argue that his locations of where he was bedding, it was very reminiscent of what he was doing in the summer time frame, early October. And so right away I was like, okay, you know, we got this deer some information from October. He was very sporadic the rest of the fall. Okay, but late season, he seems to have sucked back in. The biggest difference was simply that it wasn't in daylight. And albeit, I'm sure he was doing something somewhere, we had no food on the farm, and frankly, the bedding was off of the farm as well. But he was ranging through, and I felt like we had a pretty good chance to find a shed antlers. So to summation the shed season, you know, we got axe one out, ended up putting it right up by the apple tree, and who's right there right away? Droptine. We got him multiple times. He held his antlers all the way through early March, and I distinctly remember where I was going to film Chad, just got to Mississippi, and we're headed to Florida. We had this buck show up with some bloody bases, and I couldn't help but think that it was him. He's got a super blocky head. We went shed hunting for him, did not find his antler, and then that set us on the quest to be able to access the southern portion of our neighbor's farm here and see if we couldn't shed hunt that. And that was something that we were able to get permission to do, albeit I don't think I'm necessarily gonna be able to hunt it, but it gave us some clues that really, really started to put things into perspective with this deer. First antler we found on that shed hunt that day with Gavin and my buddy Lee Herr was this guy. It's very noticeably him. Not sure exactly how many years ago it is, but there's 1 year. Fast forward, and you've got this guy, which we found laying in a bed right above where we got summer photos of him in 2023. And I would feel very comfortable to say that this is his match set from 2 seasons ago. And it's very obvious because there's a big nub right here that ended up turning into his Droptine. If I hold these guys up, very obviously him. Made a good jump, got a lot of good mass, you know, from this year to this year. And what's interesting is these antlers were found, you know, probably 60 yards apart from each other. And so now all of a sudden, you know, we've got 2 sets of antlers to him. We hadn't found this guy yet, we'll get there. We've got 2 years of sets to him, and I couldn't believe that we couldn't find his antlers. I mean, we used Onyx Track, 3 different guys, and just covered this place. I felt like we did a really good job with it. Fast forward to turkey season, get a phone call from the landowner, and he said, hey, you know, check your texts, wouldn't you know it? Got a picture, he's like, that looked familiar, and I'm like, yeah, where the heck was that thing? And it was 80 yards away from the trail camera that we were getting him all year. We walked right by the antler multiple times. And so that all of a sudden puts into perspective, this buck calls his farm home for multiple times of the year. And I'm hoping, you know, coming off of having only hunted it 1 season, that he's going to do the same things. You know, I've got 3 years of antlers. That's information telling me that he, at least in the late season, is here. So that gives us an opportunity to work backwards and go, well, how could we kill him? But where I am moving all of my gears is going to be early October and how we can kill this buck. So now here we are in 2024, as I mentioned, it's June 10th, and my mind goes right into how can I kill this deer? I know that he's here early, and I know that he's here late, at least one season in 2023. I've got confirmation that he's here late for another 2 years prior to that, and I would argue that we have confirmation that he's doing that pattern in late season at least for the last 2 years. Well, the first thing that we looked at when we came out here on Wednesday, prior in the day we put out these cameras and this axe, was the crop rotation. And so with the plan that I'm about to go into and what we had developed for coming out here, it could be completely, destroyed. I mean, at the end of the day, in my experience, I believe crop rotation does play a bigger role. And what I mean by that is simply that I think it will change where he beds on particular winds, and at the end of the day, for an early October plan, the very most important thing is that he's bedding close to whatever spot you're hunting him. If I go back all the way to 2020, hunting that big velvet buck, here's this deer doing a consistent pattern on those turn-ups, every single night. But one of the things that we believed was that his bedroom was literally right around the corner on a ridge. And in the days that he would daylight, he was not coming from very far away. Well, luckily, Kaleb and I slipped in there, we killed him, and the story was put to rest. But it's a very similar situation with this Droptine deer, albeit, this Droptine, he is doing what? He is daylighting without any sort of assistance from our end. He's got water, he had some clover on the pond dam, and that's where I'm gonna take us, is this quote unquote plan of how I think I'm gonna be able to kill him in 2024. This entire plan is based off of data we acquired in our one singular year on this property. As I mentioned, a lot of it's coming from trail cam data, some of it's coming from observation, and most importantly, what we're doing is we're working backwards, and that's something that works for me. So when I say we're working backwards, let's go back to that early September timeframe. Out by the apple tree, we have daylight photos of Droptine walking through post-storm, very, very early. Okay, that's one. Two, we have the Droptine encounter October 1st. Two more times, we have daylight right on the cusp after we moved the hay bale blind over to the pond and made a scrape right there. So I got 4 opportunities to look at. And the first thing that I started with was looking at the late September timeframe. What happened? Well, we had a storm come through. I like to use weather underground just because it's very easy to go back and look at historical weather data, specifically wind directions is what I'm paying attention to. And when I looked at that day, what was it? It was a south wind all day, switched to north. And I was like, that's pretty interesting, okay. Well, where he is, he's on the south side of the farm. He gets up on that wind switch, and he's switching beds. It doesn't, you look back and you're like, that makes a ton of sense. Mature buck gets up, gets a drink of water, maybe munches on some clover, and then he makes his way to the north with the wind in his face. Okay, maybe that's just a fluke. Well, fast forward, just to summarize this really quickly, every single time that I got him on daylight, close to daylight right there, it was the exact same pattern. Southerly all day with a wind switch to the north during daylight. And you look back at that and go, man, that's pretty obvious. Why weren't you picking up on that? Well, like I said, it makes sense now why we weren't seeing him on the cold front days, because his southerly beds were on this side of the property. And I was like, all right, well, if that's the theory here, we should have some daylight photos of him on the north. Well, fast forward, Cuddy back on the other side there. It wasn't even just paying attention to. There he was. The days on those fronts, he was walking early. We were just hunting him on the wrong side of the property. And that's where I go back to of, okay, I need to hunt this deer based on where his bedroom is. And I've got a lot of intel that tells me on particular winds, he is over here. So building off of looking at this wind switch, for lack of a better term, and when we were getting him to daylight, my theory is that we're not gonna kill this deer on a cold front day. We're gonna kill him on the day that the wind switches. And if you look at it, it pretty much was coinciding with the days before the front. And I think that hopefully this crop rotation doesn't play a huge role for us. I mean, at the end of the day, what it could do if he is bedding in the corn is it's gonna push him a little bit further to the east, getting up out of that bed, heading the way that he's going to. He just might not get there in daylight. But I think topographically speaking, we are still gonna have the same things playing in our favor. If you look at how this spot lays out, this particular ridge, it lays down on the south side, facing north. The ditch itself is so thick and it's super deep that deer just aren't crossing it. And it makes total sense why when he's on that, south wind, he's got the wind at his back, he's probably looking to the north. When that wind switches, he gets up, he walks over to the pond. There's a nice, great grass crossing for him, super easy, right at the head of the ditch. Hits the pond dam, gets a drink, and then he makes his way north. The original plan was going to be to put the food plot at the apple tree, which why not put it there? Well, if you look at all the days he daylighted, he only made it there one singular time in daylight. He's already doing it. I mean, we have no control of the ag, but at the end of the day, what we can control is taking a spot that he's using and trying to make it a little bit better. You know, if you look at how that spot lays out, there's where we had the hay bale blind in the beginning at the apple tree. There's the hay bale blind where we moved it towards the pond. And there's this little section in the middle that never really crossed my mind that it's already an incredible pinch. It's where we saw him walk on October 1st. He comes in, gets a drink, walks that pond dam. There's some, you know, volunteer clover already on the dam, and it's just makes an L shape for him. And you know, we started talking about it, and I was like, why don't we put it there? You know, at the end of the day, that's what he does in daylight. And if we're going to give ourselves a chance to get up on his feet earlier, we got to come up with the right food source to get him there. And that is what we're gonna do. You know, we're gonna try and put a trailer blind, redneck on top of it, because that's one thing, just full disclosure, there's not a single tree I can hunt on the south side of the farm. The property line just lays out that way. And that's why we tried to implement the hay bale blind. But what we're gonna do is put a food plot in an L shape right there on the corner. We've talked about different mixes. You know, there's the Monsterbuck Rut Greens, which I think is a great option for all year. I might sprinkle in some deer radishes with that for an early season attraction. And then you've got clover already naturally on that lane. There's a pond on the north side and there's a pond on the south side. And if I can situate that blind right by that pinch that he's already using, put some food there to try to attract him a little bit earlier, we're gonna hunt that thing on the south wind switching to north. The south wind is gonna blow into the north pond, and when that wind switches, hopefully we'll be able to, you know, blow our wind right into the south pond. You know, one of the things that Ryan Gavin brought up is like, well, what happens if your wind swirls down that ditch? Thermals are gonna fall at night. Could happen. We're gonna be relying on, you know, the blind, the ozonics, and ultimately, I'm gonna rely on by the time the wind hits him, we're gonna get an arrow in him. So it's a plan that I feel like had we been able to, you know, just pay attention to this information real time, we really probably should have had a shot at him. But here we are, you know, X amount of months later. We know this deer likes this property. We know what time of year he likes the property. And I think that we've got a pretty decent plan to hopefully get an arrow in him early October. If that plot doesn't work, the next thing that I'm gonna do is with the landowner, we're gonna go to the NRCS, talk to, or actually might be the FSA, whoever we gotta talk to. You know, this is in a CRP contract, so I can't just put food plots wherever I want. Luckily, the pond dam's not enrolled, but there's a spot here on the north side of the property where he's got his old blind that he's hunted over the years that we're gonna see if we can't get it pulled out of the contract and put into food. So that could be another opportunity, because if we can't only hunt him on that wind, I wanna be able to hunt him while he's on the farm. And there's information that tells me we have a second play up here on the north winds. So I hope that that was a little bit helpful. I mean, I know it was rambly. You know, the summation of it is that, you know, trail cam data, observations, they're all great for hunting season while you're actually, you know, chasing an animal. But at the same time, there's all these clues that get left to you. And it's, you know, up to us as deer hunters to try to unravel them. You know, maybe I'm just trying to make myself think I've got a good chance at this deer. But at the end of the day, I would argue the data lines up. And if the deer returns like I think he is, I do believe he's actually here. I got a buck in late April. That is either him or the 6x5. It's a mature deer, big head on him, big base is already going. And I've got some Axe Mineral out right behind rye. We're gonna put some Axe One around that just to try to bring the attraction up. And we're gonna see if this deer will return. If he does, I think we're in the chips on him. I can't say thank you enough to the landowner. You know, he's been amazing with letting me, every time I come out here, I'm just grateful for it. You know, as a mid to late 20s individual, my goal is to buy a farm someday. I'm just not there yet. And in the meantime, without landowners like this guy, we wouldn't be bow hunting and having the experiences we are. So, like I said, if you haven't watched it, go check Kaleb's episode out. I mean, he gave a ton of great information that I don't need to repeat. And I'm just really excited to see for 2024, if we can catch up to this guy. Rye, now this is probably not gonna happen. There is a divot right here on the left side that is, it's substantial, and Rye seems to think that that could be a second drop time being thrown off. But if there's a year he's gonna do it, it's gonna be this year. We've had a very mild winter. We had a great wet spring. It's been a great wet summer so far. And as long as that continues, these deer should have one of the best growing years of memory. And if any luck, we'll be able to put Droptine down this year. Appreciate you guys taking time to watch. Hope there was something valuable in there. Now we're gonna go jump to Mike Reed over there on the river farm. I know that Ryan, him just got a lot of Monsterbuck beans put into the ground after the floodwaters receded. I know they found a good antler, and I think that he's gonna tee up what we can expect and then also offer his twist on historical data.
Way too organized.
Well, we're just wrapping up the planting here at the River Bottom Farm. The water receded about 12 days ago. I've been keeping a close eye on it, and everything's dried out nice. And Ryan and I got all the beans in the ground today. Excited to see how this turns out. I used the Monsterbuck Pot of Gold on the first half of all the food plots. That's a more conventional bean that has a Roundup 2,4-D Liberty Ready style bean. And then on this last 8-acre field, I used the Monsterbuck forage beans, and been wanting to try them. I'm excited to see if they can withstand the heavy browse pressure out here a little bit better. And those varying maturity dates have a good green food source further into the season and better food late season. So in the next week or so, I got to get sorghum in out here, and then I've got a couple patches of switchgrass that we're gonna convert some canary patches into some bedding and some screen cover with switch. What's exciting to see Josh put a plan together on Droptine. You know, using historical information is one of the best ways, in my opinion, to catch up with the mature buck that you have history of. I've used that style over and over in the past, and you know, DK last year was a great example. You know, you just pay attention over the years, trail cam information, observations, and then start making micro adjustments, and often it leads to success. And so now that Josh has 1 year under his belt after that deer, I'm excited to see him hopefully catch up with him this fall. Bucks are really packing on the inches right now. Hopefully you guys are having luck getting all your food plots in. As always, we really appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you back next week.